Yes, it's super.
All right, we're on. All right, everyone, welcome to the first meeting of the year for 5 Miles from Anywhere. And at about midnight my time last night, after I was celebrating with my kids, I get a text from Shayna saying, "Hey, this will be my first Sherlock Holmes meeting of the year." I thought that was pretty cool. So very nice. All right, so let me go, give me 1 sec. There we go. Cool. Go to present. Excellent. Okay. So again, welcome to the January 2022, our first meeting of the year for 5 Miles from Anywhere. And if you did not know already that we are an international Sherlock Holmes Silent Society that meets virtually, so people from around the world can join us. And also that we are an official BSI Scion, so that's kind of cool too. All right, so just Happy New Year, everybody. Man, the last two have been so difficult. I'm very, very hopeful that this year will be much better. So we'll see.
Starting out well.
Starting out well, yes. Okay, so we'll just do some announcements, a brief review of 2021 here, and then we'll have our excellent presentation by Anna Behrens on Trifles and the Abbey Grange with special guests who are here, Catherine and Vita from the Edge Ensemble Theater Company. And I hope you ladies will talk a little bit about the company because really that production is fantastic of Trifles. You did a really great job. Oh, perfect. Okay. All right. So in 2021, I mean, we met 10 months out of the year. Okay. We started with Larry. He gave a talk on the Apocrypha. Then Steve Mason did the 6 Napoleons. We had Thomas Burns do the Camberwell Poisoner, which then was published in the Strand. Anna had already talked in April on Mary Celeste. And then Brian, you talked about comic books and Sherlock Holmes. And again, all of these are now on the YouTube channel. So if you missed any and you want to go watch them, they are live now. And then I talked in June about a study in combat, and that's an article I'm still needing to write up. Okay. Nancy Holder joined us, talked about Sherlockian parody. Jerry Margolin talked about the highlights of his Sherlockian artwork collection, which is the largest in the world. And if you missed that one, I highly recommend you go see it just to drool a little bit and kind of have your eyes pop out at what he's got available. Tom Turley, who said he couldn't make it today, but sends his warm wishes for the new year, discussed his past Jesus scandal in Serbia. And then last month, we did the panel discussion on the Christmas Solar Pond story, The Adventure of the Unique Dickensian. So we had a really busy year, and I think we'll be just as busy this year. So very, very excited. I think that, we always have a pretty good crowd, and now we're getting some views online. So it's just working out really well. And I just enjoy this monthly meeting. All right, so just a couple of announcements. Yeah, I just wanted to some of you guys already at the beginning talked about this, but just up the road from me was a devastating wildfire that destroyed 1,000 homes in Superior, Colorado. I'm donating my share of the profits from Belanger Books this weekend to help the victims. And I just wanted this on the PowerPoint in case people watch it after too, that you can donate money to help the people who were impacted by it. And these are actual photos that were taken from the fire. And it's just crazy. And it's just, places that I would go to shop at are just, they're gone. They just don't exist anymore. It's crazy. Fortunately, I don't know anyone who was directly impacted, but I have friends of friends who lost their homes in this.
You might explain how it started.
We had 110-mile-an-hour winds that knocked down some power lines. At least that's what I've heard, and that's how it started. Is that still the story, Michael? Has that changed at all?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Hmm.
All right. Now, and I believe she joined the call, which I'm really excited about because I thought this was very cool. So she didn't know I was going to do this one, but I like when people do kind of Sherlockian activities, even if it's not a Sherlock Holmes one. And one of our members, Lee, went and asked the question. So there's this really cool library in downtown Denver. It's Denver Central Library that's like several stories tall. And she wrote to a news organization, asked, what's on top of the Denver Central Library? And so she got to climb up to see, which I thought was a cool way to investigate it. I mean, and she got these beautiful views of the library from up there. Lee, are you on?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, Lee, want to tell us? So how did this come
Hi,
about?
Lee.
It was really cool.
Well, in the Denverite newsletter, it always ends with, have you ever had a question about Denver that you want us to investigate? And so I was waiting for my friend Michael Newman to show up at the art museum across the street, which you can see in the top left corner, that spaceship type building there. And I looked up at the library and I noticed that it had a flat roof. And, you couldn't really see anything that was on the roof. And it's a very unusual building designed by Michael Graves. So I just started to wonder, what's on the roof? Is there a roof garden, beehives, a helipad or something like that? And so I wrote in to the Denverite and they invited me to come and be escorted up to the roof, which the manager of operations for the library had never been there. But anyway, just one last thing, the pyramid looking thing is the top of a part of the library that is called the Pencil. And inside that, in 1997, 8 leaders of the world gathered to have an economic summit. So that was really cool to see too.
Oh.
All right, cool. I thought that was really neat. And when I'm done,
Yeah.
guys, I'll send a follow-up email out and I'll put the link into the article if you guys want to see it. It's a really cool article. And I love that library. It's a really neat design. And it was cool that you thought of that, Lee. And it was cool that they let you go to the top. Nicely done. All right. So just one last time before we get there, Sherlock Holmes weekend events. So this coming weekend is the Sherlock Holmes Society of London annual dinner. I believe even with Omicron out of control that they're holding it in person. And then following weekend is the BSI weekend in New York City. And it currently is still going on in person. So I've seen a couple of things online where people are dropping out now, but I'm hoping, fingers are crossed that it happens. It's a really fun weekend. It's a good time. If you do happen to be in New York that weekend, wear a mask, obviously, but visit the Merchants Room at the Westin at Grand Central, and Brian and I will be there. It would be great to meet you in person. And then for those of you who can't make it, Madeline's got the virtual BSI weekend schedule up. And again, I'll send that link out to everybody again, because there's some really cool activities. I know Friday night there's like a virtual pub night, and that'll be kind of fun. And there's a couple of other different events. So if you happen to not be able to make it to New York, you still can participate in a number of virtual activities. Oh yeah, and also on that Saturday, Madeline's got a very cool podcast she's doing about Moriarty. So I really think it'd be a lot of fun. Okay, Madeline, are you on?
Yeah, I'm right here.
You want to say anything about your podcast?
Yeah, just that, you don't have to be a Moriarty fan to show up. I think most everybody at least has an opinion on Moriarty. And that's kind of what we're looking for, is just a variety of opinions about what makes a Moriarty a Moriarty, because it's, Sherlock Holmes has really gotten to be a mythology, that it's not just the canon. Obviously, William Gillette contributed hugely to what we think of Sherlock, the popular image of Sherlock Holmes today. And Moriarty has similarly evolved. So it makes his character a little difficult to pin down. And I'm curious to see, to hear from other fans about, from other Sherlockians about what they think makes him who he is, and also who they think does it best or would do it best. So I think it's going to be fun.
I think it sounds great. Now, I don't know if I think you've sent me the invite to the podcast, but I can send it out to everybody in case you want to join. Madeline, that would be 2 Saturdays from now, okay, on the 15th. So
if anybody here wants to come, they can just DM me their email. I'm trying to keep track of everybody who comes, which is why I haven't just put out a blanket invitation with the URL. So yeah, if it just DM me your email address and I'll add you to the list.
Cool. And then you could use the chat feature here too, guys, and just privately message Madeline and send her your email. That's great. All right. I think that's all my announcements. And
Can I add one thing?
Oh, please do.
So I just wanted to let people know that I am arranging a lunch for Friday of the BSI weekend.
Hold on just 1 second. Let me lower the sound. I'm on a
Okay, so as I say, there's going to be a lunch Friday of the BSI weekend at the Taylor Public House, which is the venue of the monthly Ash Wednesday dinners. And right now we're looking at, probably buffet style service. And I'm nailing down like how much it'll be per head and what the exact menu we're going to be. I'm hoping to get all that figured out by tomorrow, and I will be posting an announcement on Facebook, most likely in the strangers room and 221B here and on my own Facebook page. So probably what we'll do is I'll have people like send me the payment via PayPal. Possibly I'll also be able to accept checks on the day. The important thing is I do need a head count so I can tell the restaurant how many people to expect, or at least, a pretty clear estimate. I don't think it has to be absolutely nailed down, but obviously they need to, order the food and everything. So I just wanted to let people know about that.
Okay.
Thank you very much. That's awesome. And hopefully those of you who will be in New York can attend. So thank you, Shana. All right, so now we'll get to the talk of today, which is Anna Behrens on Trifles and the Adventure of the Abbey Grange, with special guests Catherine Behrens and Vita Crew from the Edge Ensemble Theater Company. Hopefully you all had a chance to watch their phenomenal portrayal or little short film of Trifles. I thought it was excellent. Definitely I've spread the word with my English department at my high school to, if they use it, to definitely use this if they read that play. I'm going to exit out of here and switch over for a second. I'm going to stop sharing for a sec here, if I can get this to show up. Sorry, guys. There we go. There we go. Okay. The transition always gets me on these things. I'm also going to mute everyone except for Catherine for now. And then we'll all get a chance to participate in a little bit here. Okay. Oops. And me, of course, too.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let me just go to your PowerPoint and share it. There we go. Success. There we go. Okay. And then I'll go to present. There, I actually did it. Okay.
All right.
All right. Let me mute myself and you're on.
Okay, yeah, I know you meant Anna, not Catherine, right? Okay, that's fine. And I do hope that everyone saw the excellent film that was made on Trifles, because I do not discuss the plot here specifically. So I hope everyone has seen it so they understand what the story is about. So today we're going to talk about the play Trifles. It was written by Susan Glaspell. She also wrote a short story based on her play called A Jury of Her Peers. And I first was thinking of the connection between these two because of the word trifles. Of course, Sherlock Holmes says it is, of course, a trifle, but there's nothing so important as trifles. Right, Derek, I'm not sure how you want me to tell you, just to say Derek, and you'll switch to the next slide. Thank you. So the play Trifles is based on a real crime. So John Hasek was murdered in 1900 in Iowa. And here's a picture of Susan Glaspell. She was a reporter at the time, and she worked for a Des Moines paper, and she reported on the crime. And Derek, you can go to the next slide. Thanks. And here is actually a clipping of her story. So this murder gained national attention. And here's a picture of the house where the murder took place. And next slide. So Hasek's wife, Margaret, she said that someone broke into their house and murdered her husband with an axe while she slept next to him, which of course seems rather unbelievable, but that's what she said, and she claimed her innocence, but she did get arrested for the crime. And after she was arrested, there were a lot of rumors and stories that came out about domestic troubles and abuse at the house. Okay, next slide. So I thought this was sort of interesting, given we're talking also about Sherlock Holmes here. In the actual crime, the couple had a dog who would bark at strangers. But the wife reported that the dog did not bark at the time that her husband was killed. So where's Sherlock Holmes when you need him? Because so the defense said, well, perhaps the perpetrator drugged the dog. And the prosecution said, oh no, the dog was just so upset at seeing its owner killed. That's why it didn't bark. Next slide. So Margaret Hasek was dubbed the Lizzie Borden of Iowa. Now, Lizzie Borden's trial took place less than 10 years prior to this one. So it was pretty well known. That was very sensationalized across all the newspapers in the country and even around the world. So everyone knew about Lizzie Borden. So they started referring to Margaret, who's pictured here. I think this was a sketch taken from the trial, because allegedly she killed her husband with an axe, where Lizzie Borden used a hatchet to kill her stepmother and father. Lizzie was arrested but then acquitted, where Margaret was arrested but it was overturned, and both had rumors of abuse, and no one else was ever charged for either crime. And if you're interested in Lizzie Borden, I happen to have a Lizzie Borden podcast, so you can find out more there. And next slide. Okay, so I think here in this story, Mrs. Hale represents Sherlock Holmes. when Glaspell wrote this play, the Sherlock Holmes stories were already really well known. So obviously she would be aware of them. And by calling her play Trifles, she makes that direct link to the Sherlock Holmes mantra, there's nothing so important as trifles. And she uses trifles ignored or dismissed by the police to solve the crime. She uses her power of observation and her emotional intuition to piece together the crime. So what I'd like is for Catherine and Vita to be unmuted, and they're going to read a scene from the play.
I can't.
And you two should be able to unmute yourselves.
Okay.
There you go. Yep, you're unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Can you hear me?
I'm going to change to speaker view so that when you guys speak, you'll get the full screen effect here, okay?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, all right.
Oh,
Loud and clear. You sound great.
okay.
She was piecing a quilt.
It's log cabin pattern. Pretty, isn't it? Mrs. Peters, look at this one. Here, this is the one she was working on. And look at the sewing. All the rest of it has been so nice and even. And look at this. It's all over the place. Why, it looks as if she didn't know what she was about.
Oh, what are you doing, Mrs. Hale?
I'm just pulling out a stitch or two that's not sewed very good. Bad sewing always made me fidgety.
I don't think we ought to touch things.
I'll just finish up this end. Mrs. Peters,
Yes, Mrs. Hale?
what do you think she was so nervous about?
Right, that's great. So I'm sorry, Derek, if you can go back to the presentation.
No problem. I would have loved to keep going.
We have more scenes.
I'm sure. Just give me 1 second. I will go back to your PowerPoint. There we are. Just let me find the right spot. There we are. Correct?
No, we should be back.
Here?
Yeah, and then the next one.
Perfect. Okay.
Great.
Yeah.
So we're going to do a few scenes in succession. So I'm not sure how to do this. Maybe we can let them do it and then just go back so that we don't have to keep going back and forth.
I think that's fine.
Okay. So, but I need the next slide just to introduce them. Thank you. So Mrs. Hale, she notices the jagged stitching on the quilt squares and concludes that Mrs. Wright, who represents Mrs. Hassick here, was nervous. Then Mrs. Peters sees another clue. So we're going to do the birdcage scene, and then I'm just going to let them go right into the box scene so you don't have to go back and forth.
Why, here's a bird cage. Did she have a bird, Mrs. Hale?
Why, I don't know whether she did or not. I've not been here for so long. There was a man around last year selling canaries cheap, but I don't know if she took one. Maybe she did. She used to sing real pretty herself.
Seems funny to think of a bird here, but she must have had one, or why would she have a cage? I wonder what happened to it.
I suppose maybe the cat got it.
No, she didn't have a cat. She's got that feeling some people have about cats, being afraid of them. My cat got in her room and she was real upset and asked me to take it out.
My sister Bessie was like that. Queer, ain't it?
Why, look at this door. It's broke. One hinge is pulled apart.
It looks as if someone must have been rough with it.
Why, yes.
Great, thank you. And then the box scene.
What a pretty box. Looks like something somebody would give you. Maybe her scissors are in here. There's something wrapped up in this piece of silk. Oh, Mrs. Peters,
It's the bird.
but Mrs. Peters, look at its neck. Look at it. It's all other side too.
Somebody wrung its neck.
Great. And there's one more scene. I think maybe we should just let them do this one too. And that way you don't have to go back and forth. And this is, the next one is the connection scene where Mrs. Hale kind of puts it all together.
She liked the bird. She was going to bury it in that pretty box.
When I was a girl, my kitten, there was a boy took a hatchet and before my eyes, and before I could get there, if they hadn't held me back, I would have hurt that boy.
I wonder how it would seem never to have had any children around. No, Wright wouldn't like the bird. A thing that sang. She used to sing. He killed that too.
We don't know who killed the bird.
I knew John Wright.
It was an awful thing that was done in this house that night, Mrs. Hale. Killing a man while he slept, slipping a rope around his neck that choked the life out of him.
His neck choked the life out of him.
Okay. Thank you. Well done. I have to say, it's so wonderful to have so many members of the Edge Ensemble in my Scion group, because when we read stories aloud, I get to listen to this, which is amazing. They're so good. So thank you. So we see that Mrs. Hale kind of figures out the parallel of the husband being killed and then the bird with its neck wrung. So Derek, would you mind going back to the presentation?
You got it. Go right.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Okay. So we know that in Trifles, the husband was not killed with an axe, but rather he had a rope around his neck. So he also had a broken neck like the bird. So there's the parallel for that. So Mrs. Hale, she takes a non-traditional approach to solving the crime. She relies not only on the outward observation like Holmes does, but her understanding of human nature. She reaches a surprising conclusion. The suspected perpetrator was actually a victim in this case. Mrs. Hale's sleuthing shows Wright to be the actual perpetrator of the crimes against his wife that are unlikely to have been punished, let alone acknowledged in the patriarchal society they lived in. This is also the case in Abbey Grange, where the abused wife could not seek a divorce from her abusive husband. Okay, so next slide, yeah. So then if we're saying that Mrs. Hale is like Holmes, then Mrs. Peters must be like Watson. So Mrs. Peters, she makes observations, but she doesn't really make connections like Mrs. Hale does. She needs Mrs. Hale to enlighten her and making those connections for her, much like Watson needs Holmes for that. Mrs. Hale realizes the significance of the broken door and the bird. And Mrs. Peters, like Watson, tends to view the world through more of a traditional lens, like she sees, but she does not observe. So we see that connection there. So next slide. So that leaves the men in the play, the sheriff, the county attorney, and Mr. Hale represent Lestrade and the policeman of Scotland Yard. Holmes usually outshines those, just like Mrs. Hale has done here. The men pursue the case in the play using traditional methods, but they miss the important clues because they don't have Mrs. Hale's skill. They diminish the women's skill as Scotland Yard often downplays Holmes's methods until they're forced to admit his superiority. In this play, of course, Mrs. Hale does not reveal her superior methods to men. She leaves them in the dark, as Holmes has been known to do. Mr. Wright, the murder victim, is revealed to be the actual perpetrator of crimes against his wife, like we've talked about it already. So we see that this patriarchal society has led these women to just say, you know what, it's not really her fault. She was a victim here, so they feel she's worthy of their mercy, and they don't let on that they understand that she committed the crime. So next slide. So specific similarities between Trifles and Abbey Grange. We've talked about some already. And so Trifles was first published in 1916, about 12 years after Abbey Grange. There, like we said, there's an abused wife in both Abbey Grange and Trifles. The husband's killing of the wife's beloved dog in Abbey Grange parallels the husband's killing of the wife's beloved bird in Trifles. Minnie Wright is the abused wife in Trifles who does not admit to her crime. And Teresa Wright is the maid in Abbey Grange who tells of the abuse of her lady suffered at the hands of her husband and lied to help protect her. Mrs. Hale and Holmes, both H names, they use clues or trifles missed by the police as evidence to solve the crime. In the case of Trifles, the broken bird cage, the bird with the neck wrung, and the poor stitching. And in Abbey Grange, the cut bell rope, the blood stain, and the sediment in only one of the 3 wine glasses. So next slide, please. So Mrs. Hale's sleuthing shows Wright to be the actual perpetrator, as we've said already. This is also the case in Abbey, where the abused wife could not seek a divorce from her husband. And she couldn't do anything about it. The law wouldn't do anything, even though he was abusive toward her. The wives share initials with their maiden names. Minnie was Minnie Foster before she married Mr. Wright in Trifles, and Mary was Mary Fraser before she married Brackenstall in Abbey Grange. And although these characters really aren't parallel, we do see the JW in John Watson and John Wright, who's the murdered victim. So Glaspell chose to name her play Trifles, as in paying attention to trifles to solve the crime in both Abbey, and that was the case in both Abbey Grange and certainly in the play Trifles. And Mr. Hale kind of dismisses the women in Trifles. He says, well, women are used to worrying over trifles. So that kind of tells you that they don't even think twice that the women can't possibly have come up with anything on their own. They just sort of ignore them. Next slide, please. So Holmes in Abbey Grange kind of takes the law into his own hands. He appoints Watson the jury, and while he himself is the judge, and then they let Jack Crocker go free. Holmes justifies it by using that Latin phrase, vox populi, vox Dei, like voice of the people is the voice of God. So what they decide goes. By staying silent and hiding the evidence of the dead bird, Mrs. Hale takes the law into her own hands, and she deduces that Mrs. Wright is guilty of murdering her husband, but that she's justified because of the psychological abuse she suffered at his hands. As Susan Glaspell's short story that she based on Trifles indicates, Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peters appoint themselves a jury of her peers. So this is what she called her short story. So we see that that they have in fact done the same thing as Holmes and Watson and decided for themselves that they're judge and jury. Okay, so next slide. And I just wanted, I didn't see much about this connection online, except at this Rebecca Hope. She really had a lot of great insights. So I relied on her information a lot. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Anyway, so and just wanted to say thanks. That's it. I see there's a lot of questions in the
Oh
chat.
yeah, there will be, I'm sure you're gonna get bombarded with questions for the next 20 minutes. Fantastic talk, Anna, and Catherine and Vita. You guys, as far as I'm concerned, you are Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peters. Just such a wonderful, wonderful production.
Oh,
All right, and so looking at, let's, couple of questions in the chat. One of the questions was from Lee. It was at the time that the story was written, could women serve on juries? Do you happen to have an answer for that one?
I knowing a lot about Lizzie Borden, I know at that time period, no, they couldn't, because it was all male juries for her, and that wasn't that much earlier. So I would guess no, but I don't know for sure.
And for questions, or if you have a question for someone, please just unmute and ask. For the most part, that would be fine.
They couldn't even vote. They couldn't even vote at that time. So I think women didn't serve on juries until the 60s.
Oh my gosh.
That was that long, huh? Wow. Okay. All right. I had a question, Anna, about the case that the story was based on, especially with that connection to Lizzie Borden, another area you're an expert on. I was just wondering, did Margaret Hasek, I believe that's how her name was pronounced, did she get the same? Did she become like a pariah after the trial, the way that Lizzie did in the town, where people just didn't, they assumed she was guilty, but she got off easy?
Well, the idea that she had been abused kind of worked against her. It's interesting because it made more people think she was guilty. And because it was a pretty awful crime with an axe, I think that is the case. Although I don't know that much about the case. I just did a little bit of research because I hadn't heard of it before, but I suspect that would be the case. Yeah, much like Lizzie Borden, where, yeah, people would, cross the street when they saw her coming. So.
All right, interesting. I just thought it was interesting that she was found guilty and then they overturned it a year later too. Like, that to me was kind of interesting.
Yeah, and then a hung jury. So I guess there was, it just seems odd to me because, I can't understand how someone could be killed with an axe while you're lying next to them in bed and you wouldn't notice. It just sounds.
Or strangled with a rope, for that matter.
Or strangled from a rope, for that matter, exactly. It just sounds extremely unlikely. But yeah, I know I got information about it. It's called, I think it's called iowacoldcases.com. So if you want to find out more about the crime, I think there's a lot of information there.
I'm just curious for Catherine and Vita for a minute here. Just talk us through a little bit about how your production came about. Why did you choose this play? And how did you get kind of in the heads of your characters? Because like I said, you both were very convincing in your roles.
I'll let Catherine introduce, because she was more involved in the process of choosing it. And
yeah, I had always heard of the play for many years and liked it, and I thought it'd be a great one-act play to perform on stage. So when we had to shut down because of COVID, we couldn't do live stage plays anymore. We were looking to do a film, and it had to be a one act because it's a very expensive process. And, 30 minutes was about all we could manage. But I thought it lent itself to film actually very well. And, so Kim agreed. And so we went for it.
Yeah, it was a relatively new experience for us, doing film when most of us are accustomed to the stage. But one of the things I really liked about it was being able to be subtle, to be very natural, and that the film picks that up beautifully. And I don't know, I liked my character right from the get-go because I really saw her completely as a woman of the times and somebody who was, she was married to the sheriff. She was probably, reasonably well off relative to the rest of the community, and had was trying to be sort of ladylike and proper, which is very much, something I can relate to. It's my, my own background of what was expected as a child and so forth. So I could kind of understand her. And I really felt like Catherine was perfect for Mrs. Hale because she has that very immediate quality of somebody who has been through life and kind of understands a lot of things. In some ways, I felt like as Mrs. Peters, I was a little more protected, although obviously I bring up stories from the past that were traumatic, so she's sensitive. But I think the key for me about this whole discussion of, is this really connected to Sherlock Holmes? It's really important to remember that we're looking at women and the world of women. And what I think is really wonderful in the play is the juxtaposition of the men operating in one little world where they're hearing the story and responding to it in their way. And then we are representing how women look at things and responding it the way we're noticing the things that women would notice. And, for example, the lawyer looks at a whole lot of things that are really obvious and totally. So it's just, that I think that fact that there's this whole female slant is something kind of different. I mean, and which to me makes it very different from Sherlock Holmes. But I can definitely understand where everyone's seeing the parallels.
Yeah, I think Susan Glaspell made it a feminist play. I mean, she was like, okay, maybe she used some of the elements from Sherlock Holmes, but she definitely wanted it to be a feminist
and it's
play.
Considered an early feminist play by people today. I don't know how people at the time considered it.
But I think in a previous talk, I'm not sure if it was you, Anna, but someone mentioned that Sherlock Holmes was a feminist because he practiced allyship with the women in his stories.
That wasn't me, but that's an interesting.
I mean, it's true that Arthur Conan Doyle, when he wrote that story, The Abbey Grange, it was because he really had a problem with the divorce laws in England, and he was making a point about that. So, transcending Holmes for a second there and stepping out of the game, it really was something that Doyle cared about.
And I think also having an alcoholic father, he was very sympathetic to his mother and what she suffered because of that. So I thought maybe that was part of it, why he chose the husband to be an alcoholic. Yeah.
It felt so right to me. And I think that culturally, when you look at the roles of men and women, especially at that time, that the women would just, look at things in a different way and just fix it. Just handle it. Don't bother dad, don't bother father about this. We'll just, we won't tell him. And, that's kind of what we were doing is ultimately making a decision about whether to reveal what we had seen or not. And it was definitely a decision to no, this is women's stuff. We're gonna handle it.
Yeah. I wonder when in the real crime, when she was then overturned, was it overturned because of lack of evidence, or was it overturned because they felt for her? They thought that she had a right, maybe, to respond seriously to an abusive husband. And I'd be surprised if it were the latter, back then. But that's just an interesting. I'm not sure that was even an issue in those days, whether women would have the right to respond violently to a violent husband. But
well, I know in the case of Lizzie Borden, I think there was just disbelief that a woman could perpetrate such violent crime. And the 12 male jurors, after they acquitted her, they had a portrait done of themselves, a photograph, and they framed it and they gave it to her as a gift. So, yeah.
Good for them.
So I think they were, I don't know, maybe it was a way of saying, yeah, you couldn't really have done this, And so I wonder too, with Margaret Hasek, if it was beyond belief that a woman could commit such a violent crime.
Yeah, the traditional woman's weapon is poison, isn't it?
Poison.
Don't give anybody
she could have gotten
ideas.
a hold of some poison.
Shana, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, when I read the play and when I watched the performance on YouTube, there was a more recent case that I was reminded of, and that was the Lorena Bobbitt case, if any of you remember that. That was back in the 80s. And that was a lady who castrated her husband while she slept and then left the house and drove out into the night and threw it out the window. And when the sun broke, everyone was just like, what? And then, as the case was investigated, there were allegations of domestic abuse where she was the victim, at which point a lot of people were like, actually, you know what? Maybe we had it coming.
I'm not sure that's technically castration. I think castration is a little different.
I mean, that's how it was phrased popularly in the press. I mean, strictly speaking, yeah, it was,
The punishment fits the crime.
Something new.
I would, one of the things I honestly, I could just go on and on about how much I love the production, but one of the things I think you do a really good job on, and the actors as well, is as you brought up, that difference between the men and the women, and just how dismissive the guys are of the female character, right? It's have you figured out if it's the stitching yet? Stuff like that. I thought was particularly effective in your production. The first time I ever saw any of this was an Alfred Hitchcock Presents episode of Trifles, and I saw that when I was in high school, and then I sought out the play a few years later and read it, and I was real excited when Anna wanted to do this again. So I really liked it. The other thing, just when you showed the pictures, Anna, the house that you guys used for the background looked very similar to the real house in the Iowa crime. Was that intentional?
I don't know. I'm not sure where Kim, the director, found that image.
It was it was a stock image.
Stock image.
Yeah.
Well, you're supposed to say, of course it was.
Yeah, right.
Always claim, of course it was. Always answer those questions that way.
I wasn't aware that there was an Alfred Hitchcock's Presents version of this play. I'm gonna have to track that down, because another thing that this reminded me of was another Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which was their version of Roald Dahl's Lamb to the Slaughter, which is another case of domestic murder, which, if you haven't seen that, I won't spoil it. It's got one of the great twist endings of all time and well worth checking out.
I I think Catherine, you and I watched that Alfred Hitchcock Presents
did,
version,
yeah.
and it was rewritten, and it was quite different. I think it wasn't. So, I mean, it was still fun to watch, but it was different.
I'd just like to compliment the two lead actors on the breads theme. Particularly, my ears really picked up when Vita, when you said, "Oh, she had bread set," and just the tone of your voice, you know, really showed me that it's sort of like Watson. Sometimes he points to a clue and Sherlock picks up on it, but what Watson doesn't know what he's found, you know?
Right. That was typical.
Right, yeah.
And the cherries, and it looked for a second there that like you were going to sit down and eat the bread with the cherry jam on it, which to me seemed like an allusion to the Last Supper.
I love the difference in perspective between the male investigators and the women. Like, can you believe that this woman, we've arrested her for murder, she's worried about her preserves? And meanwhile, the wives like, oh, all that work wasted.
It's like they have a whole different consciousness, the women, at the
That's
same
right.
time men. It's like almost like they're not really in the same world. They're just sort of parallel to each other.
Viva la différence, eh?
We're running short on time now. Does anybody have any other questions for Anna or Catherine and Vita? Or any last thoughts?
I just want to say that the production was brilliant. I've watched it 3 times, and I read the play. It is outstanding. I'd never heard of this before, so I'm so thankful that you brought it to our attention.
Thank you.
Yeah, Anna, I was going to suggest that you write this up as an article for a journal. I think it's a really good connection. I don't think, and as you said, there's not a lot of people who have made this connection between the two, the story and the play. And I definitely think it's worthy of publication, and it's really great. So
Already on it. But thank you. Well, thanks, everyone. I appreciate your coming on a holiday, taking your time.
I agree with Lee there. This was a great way to start off the new year. It's a very auspicious beginning.
Happy New Year.
All right. Well, I want to thank Anna, of course, for the wonderful presentation, and for Catherine and Vita for taking the time out again on this holiday and showing your acting chops. So just why don't you wrap up?
It's our pleasure.
Why don't you wrap up by telling us what's coming up for the Edge Ensemble? What's in your future?
Well, we just completed another film, which premiered last night on YouTube, called Beautiful Distances. It's an adaptation of another Susan Glaspell play. So you might want to check it out. And as for the future, I don't know. A lot depends upon when we can get back on stage, but that might be a while. So we may have to come up with other films or other kinds of projects just to keep our hand in.
Oh, we do have in August. You want to talk about your?
Oh, right. Well, you talk about it, Anna. It's your idea.
Well, Catherine is marvelous at play adaptations. So the Beautiful Distances she adapted from Susan Glaspell's play, and she's also done 4 Sherlock Holmes pastiches she's adapted for the stage. One is one of Derek's stories. Yes, Virginia, there is a Sherlock Holmes.
Sherlock Holmes.
And you've done a Solar Ponds story, though I don't remember which one it was, but
The
Um,
late Mr. Faversham.
that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
And you have done an adaptation
The unique Hamlet,
of the unique Hamlet,
Vincent Sterrett, yes.
Right.
And Mark Twain.
Mark Twain, when he did the double-barrel detective story,
Right, yeah,
which has Sherlock Holmes show up. So
right, yeah.
he did that. So hopefully they will be performed in August
As radio plays.
as radio
That's
plays.
what we envision, doing them as radio plays with Foley artists. So
Yeah.
that should be fun.
And let me add in, because I think you're being even a little modest, that they're doing a whole Sherlock Holmes week, in a week of events is it the Keene Library, Keene, New Hampshire, or is it
Yeah, Keene
Okay.
Public Library.
Keene Public Library? And you know, they're doing some astounding work out there and just opening the Sherlock Holmes community up to others. Anna started a Sherlock Holmes club at her local school. I mean, they're doing some amazing work, and I want to really congratulate them. And they're doing, you know, they're keeping the Sherlock Holmes stories alive. So we really appreciate everything that you guys are doing.
Thank you. It should be
Yes.
fun. If anyone's in Keene, New Hampshire in August, please come. But hopefully we'll be filming those as well.
I was going to ask if any chance we could stream some of that or film it and share it.
I think typically that we do film, right, Catherine, you do film the every
Well,
production.
we do archival films, you know, like just to keep for the archives. It's not really a film. It's just recording of the stage play.
A recording. Yes.
Wouldn't be hard to set up to stream it though. I mean,
Right, yeah. Well,
think
that's
it-
something that we could look into, yeah.
I was thinking maybe for our August meeting for us, maybe we could make that work. Maybe have a live presentation.
Hmm.
Let's think about that. We got a few months here to work out
Yeah,
those
right.
details.
Yeah.
All right, we have hit, we're overtime. So I do want to wrap things up because I know people, you may have places to go and everything. I want to thank, of course, let's give another round of applause for our speakers for today. I hope to see a number of you guys during some Sherlock Holmes activity over the BSI weekend, whether it's in person in New York or virtually. And then next month for the February meeting, we're going to have a panel discussion on the question of what makes for a great Sherlock Holmes villain. Okay, and Madeline is going to be one of our participants. Possibly somebody else here is. I just haven't heard back yet. Rob Nunn will also be on the panel. He wrote a book about what if Sherlock Holmes was a villain. It's a really fun read. And there'll be at least one or two other people participating. So I look forward to seeing you guys in February. Have a great start to the new year. Oh, there it is, The Criminal Mastermind of Baker Street. Rich is holding it up. That's Rob's book there. It's a really fun book. It's what if Sherlock Holmes was a criminal instead of a detective. Anyway, I just want to thank everybody for coming. Remarkably, even after that wildfire, I've got to go shovel out 6 inches of snow. So, and yes, Larry, I will send out, I'll do a follow-up email and I'll send out the link. I'll send out the link to Beautiful Distances as well. I'll go find that one. I'll make sure I share that with everybody.
Thank you.
Well.
Thanks so much.
All right, my friends, take care and have a great new year. Bye now.
Happy New
Bye.
Year.
bye-bye.
Bye.